We're going to go to Ari. How you doing, Ari?
Pretty good. I got a question, philosophy about Intel.
Uh-huh.
CNBC has really been blessing Intel on many directions. Like they had the CEO of NVIDIA on twice telling how his chips are so superior because they could do multi-processing at a much larger scale.
Yeah.
And they had AMD on twice telling how the new chips are so much advanced than Intel. And Kramer comes on a couple times saying that, if you're going to buy a chip for the cloud, if you're going to buy a server for the cloud, you're going to use chips from AMD.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry I had to laugh, but go ahead.
Yeah. And you could correct me. He said that Intel is sitting on a 10 nanomils and AMD's on 7. I find it hard to believe that AMD would be lower down than Intel.
Well, that is the truth. But what are we interested in the stock market? And that is how much money the companies make. One of the problems is as you drop the size of the die, your yield, or the amount of ones that come out the end of the factory that work, is always lower. Right? So what Intel figured out a couple of years ago was that, yes, they could build them and no, they weren't going to make as much money. They were better off actually staying at the higher level until they could figure out a way to get the yields higher. And lo and behold, I've heard that for the last year and a half from Intel. And last week, I'll talk about it on Friday's show with Tom O'Brien. But last week, all these articles coming out of Taiwan and Taiwan Semiconductor, the fab that builds most of the chips for most of these folks, most of them are pulling their orders for these low die size chips because they're not making any money. The yields are crap. So the question is, if you can build one of these, you spend 2 months Intel does, putting a processor in and starting, it's 2 months before it comes out the other end of the building. What happens after you spent 2 months and the thing don't work? And that's the problem that everybody's having, or not everybody, but some people are having. And the question is, how is that going to hit AMD and others' profit line? Because they end up paying for it. So either in reduced chip prices or higher costs to people like Taiwan Semiconductor that actually build their chips. Because AMD doesn't really build their own chips. They farm it off to Global Foundries or Taiwan Semiconductor to actually build them, right? So, right now, 98% of all server chips are from Intel. So let's say that AMD gets 0.5% more. It's still 97.5% of all server chips are Intel. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but these guys have to make sure that they're available 99.99% of the time. And you can do an AMD chip, but Intel has a lot of the patents that really make the ones that people like Google and Amazon and Microsoft are going to buy. So Intel's big problem right now is that, as you said, everybody wants to dump on them. It's nothing that you couldn't solve by firing everybody that sits on the board of Intel. They decided to go down the road of political correctness, and they're paying the price. They can't get a new CEO in. They didn't get a new one when I was gone last week, did they?
No.
No, I don't think so. No one wants to come in because they know these guys are bat crap crazy in the board, and you need to fire a bunch of people off the board. Intel could be back in gear fairly quickly, but they started building 8-nanometer stuff in a single factory like 2.5 years ago. So it's not that they can't. It's that they decided that it doesn't make them any money, and that's it. You want to hang on? We'll talk more about this because I think it's
Yes.
an interesting. Are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
You know,
So
it's interesting. Kramer went so far as to say when Amazon wants a server, when Google wants a server, when Microsoft wants a server, they're buying AMD. That's what he said, and I just couldn't believe it.
are they buying some? Yeah, but it's a fairly minor part of the business. So I just, Kramer, what else can you say about him?
Well, in my opinion, he could drive a stock from $15 to $30 without much trouble.
Oh, there's one out here today that's getting hammered. That one he did. So I'm not saying he can't move markets. In fact, it's CCR. He ran this thing up to 100 and or is it CRR? He ran this thing up to 150 or 160 bucks a few years ago. When everybody knew, well, let's go back a few. Is it more than that? Oh, let's go back here. Okay, $154.71 on July 1st, 2014. So we're a little about 4 years down the line, but that high was courtesy of the evil one, if I can call him that.
Bring me the head of the false prophet, Jim Cramer.
I always loved that sound clip from The Daily Show. I think it was The Daily Show. But now I don't know what else you can say, but he's pretty good at it. My guess is, or I've always had a theory that Kramer, since he can't directly invest in those companies himself, does it for his buddies. And, maybe someone calls up and goes, hey, I want to sell some AMD, so I need you to get on there and tell everybody how great AMD is, and we'll sell in to the dumb money that comes in after the, smart money that drives this thing up. So is AMD a lot better off than it was 2 years ago when I thought that they were 5 minutes away from going bankrupt and there was little to see out here? They were. You couldn't really figure out that they were going to make money from Bitcoin mining. But NVIDIA's stuff just blows them out of the water now. And their chips aren't really that great. They're much better than they were. So that they still compete on price, though. They don't compete on being the best. So if you're not the best in electronics, as long as your price is affordable, which I think Intel is, I'm still a fan. I wouldn't be buying an AMD chip if I was building a server today. But that's it. But yeah, I was looking for this article that I saw last week, and I know I saved it, but it was all about maybe 4 or 5, maybe even 6 or 7 companies that had all stopped production of the smaller die size for their chips because it was running them broke. So I wouldn't be surprised to see in the next earnings announcement that some of these companies have made a lot less money or maybe even lost money on going to die sizes that can't be made at a reasonable yield. So
now is Intel using 8 nanometers now?
No.
Or they're still 10?
I think they're actually at 12. Again,
okay.
It doesn't make you any good to go to 8 if you can't build 8 and make money. And that is the problem.
I agree with you.
That is the problem, and I think a lot of people are not doing it. The question I would ask is AMD, and of course you're not going to get anybody to answer the question, is what is your yield on these new chips? And, they may be selling some of this stuff, but the question is how much money are they going to be making on it? And again, when you look at Intel, their yield's about 96%. So about 4 out of 100 chips get to the end of the line for what I call either desktop or server chips get to the end of the line and don't work. Now, some of those actually just don't work at higher speeds. So they put a different number on them so that they work at lower speeds. than they were built to actually do, and they'll sell those off. So they still make some money on some of those. About 2% of chips never actually ever work for a variety of reasons. A little mote of dust gets into them, or the chemicals procedures off slightly. But Intel's got the best procedures in the world. What they don't have now is a good CEO, and it's very easy to take pot shots on them. And it's fine for me. I would love for them to beat the price down even further. And when they get a new CEO, hopefully he's strong enough CEO to get rid of the morons on the board. And I think you could see, $60, $70 on Intel with the right CEO.
What about this NVIDIA chip that's supposed to do like tremendous amount of multiprocessing? I mean, the CEO basically implied that you could take a few of his chip and replace the whole server room. I'm serious. That's what he basically said.
And he's wrong. What NVIDIA is doing is using their GPUs, which are chips that can do a lot of lower level math in parallel. The problem is that you can't run a desktop computer on something like that. It just doesn't work. It's actually,
and then you can't even run, then you surely can't run a server on it.
No, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You can do some parallelization, which actually is something I've been working on for about a year on some of the stuff that I've been working on, just to make it a little faster. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but no, I think that there's a lot of just a lot of hyperbole around that. I think the NVIDIA guy, after they came out with earnings and everybody started screaming at them because the earnings pop didn't go so well, everybody was, oh, it's the end of NVIDIA. But of course, everybody was shorting the living daylights out of NVIDIA, and you've had pretty much a short squeeze since it hit 240. I'm not saying that I would ever short NVIDIA. It's got too high of a short interest, and it's almost, with their video cards, almost a monopoly. They are so much better now than AMD that it's ridiculous. And again, in a monopoly position like Apple or Google or Amazon, once you really reach the monopoly thing, it's hard to tell how high you can go. But the new NVIDIA cards are great. I think AMD is going to have a real problem in less than, well, maybe a year selling anything, because it just doesn't do ray tracing like the NVIDIA. So I do like NVIDIA. I wouldn't be short the thing. I think AMD has a lot of issues out there, but my guess is Kramer is the one who's probably spending a lot of time helping his buddies get out of AMD, which has been a dog 10 years or so, whatever. And now it's kind of come back, fatten it up yourself.